Where do we start? Is this, how many films have you done prior to this?
Feature films?
Yeah.
One. I made a lot of PBS.
Yeah, a little bit closer. Yes, PBS films, yes, PBS, okay.
Lots of PBS films, but this is the second documentary feature.
Okay, cool. And how did you come to it?
By working on PBS films?
Yeah.
More or less.
Is this a project you developed initially? What role did Abigail play relative to your own involvement?
Well, I'd worked with on my first feature film with Abigail, and it actually played here. It was called The Armor of Light.
Yeah, about a minister in Buffalo who suddenly became a crusader against gun proliferation. Yeah,
he was
very powerful film.
Yeah, a powerful player in the anti-abortion movement. And then he decided that you couldn't really be anti-abortion and pro-gun. That's another film. I worked on that film with Abigail. And after that, I stuck around working with her on some smaller projects, podcasts, things like that. And in 2018, she was contacted by Ralph in Anaheim. And to me, it just seemed like an obvious thing to do. And both Abigail and I have separately cared about this inequality story for many years. I made a couple of films, with Bill Moyers at PBS about this very subject about downward mobility, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, and it feels like it's an evergreen subject. I mean, it just...
Right, that's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, yesterday, I guess, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Powell, made a comment about the ways to deal with inflation will inevitably lead to what's called a softening of the job market. At a time when wages have been increasing recently, and it poses questions just in terms of, getting to this $15 an hour threshold. It happened a little faster than people would have thought, partly because of the pandemic.
Correct.
And it seems like that's the right direction to be going.
It does seem like the right direction, and it's going to be an interesting time right now. I feel for decades we have just devalued work. I think as a culture and as an economy, and so often you'll hear about unemployment statistics. And we talk about how unemployment is at record lows, but we never talk about what the wages are. We never talk about what the benefits are, what the compensation is, and that's become that. And we sort of ignore all of that. And so right now, more and more, I feel like we're starting to link, the quality of work and compensation with the jobs, and we haven't seen that.
And there's been a major sort of rejuggling of the available workforce, really, in a lot of service areas particularly. Now, is Disney facing labor shortages at all?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been hearing, even since we finished making the film, there's been just a real problem, and they're talking about even raising wages more for hotel workers, and that's because they can't keep people.
Right.
And if they do, it's because they are a bellwether company, as someone says in the film. It might pull up wages in the other service, in the other hotels and places that are. I mean, there's so many of them in these regions, Orlando and Anaheim, and across the country.
The Disney empire has been a huge deal for a long time. And you may or probably do know that Disney was extremely fierce against competitors in the animation field during the early years of Hollywood, and really became a bit of a monopoly in terms of the style of education. I mean, of entertainment. That likewise, Disney in many ways was a leader in sort of the commercialization of media. And remains sort of that way. I mean, one could look at Star Wars even as an example, which sort of had this inspired beginning of sorts, and has now become a movie a year, sort of, churning out like a mill, Star Wars movies, because Disney bought the franchise from Fox. I guess it had it before.
Yes. growing. It's a huge,
Yeah.
massive company now. It seems to own more than half of our media.
Right.
We don't even realize it. I was looking at, someone suggested I look at a job at ABC News. Long story, but I opened it up on Friday morning. I went to LinkedIn, I opened it up, and it says ABC News, but when you click on the job, up comes Disney, welcome to Disney, and there's, Mickey Mouse floating around, the job application.
Yes.
So, yes.
Disney also basically led the fight to make public domain much more restrictive.
Yes. And they're lobbying. I mean, you saw a tiny bit of it when Abby goes to Congress.
Right, right. Getting Congress to basically say, we don't want to hear from you.
Yeah, it was remarkable to be there and having, Congress people say, well, it's so unusual to have cameras in Congress. And you're like, what? There's cameras in Congress all the time. But they were just trying to find
They
a
had
way.
heard of C-SPAN.
Right. They were just trying to keep us out. But we were, I mean, you look at even this little town of Anaheim and the kind of money that Disney spends to make sure that they control the city council. And you go to Florida and, I mean, we got Ron DeSantis now, but still.
Building that huge parking lot and then essentially giving it to Disney and letting them get the revenue from it.
Absolutely.
It's,
right.
I mean, it is socialism.
For corporations. Yeah. And that's really what's happened in the last 40 or 50 years. Is the rules have all been written to benefit the corporations.
I mean, the studio system is collapsing, and Disney may be the only survivor of it.
It's going to be interesting.
I think it's possible, because I mean, Paramount is on its last legs. MGM has been dead for years, although Amazon has just bought it, and I have no idea what they're going to do with it. Warner Brothers, which was a powerhouse, has sort of crumbled. So
Disney, not good for anybody.
Disney is seen as extremely powerful, the most powerful media company, I guess, probably.
Absolutely.
At this point. Yeah. You touched some on the cultural aspects, the Disney influence, and maybe just your thoughts further about that, just in terms of what Disney has meant in terms of representation of gender, race, class issues.
Well, I think that Disney represents a version of us, of our society back to us, and has since they started. Over the years, they've been heroic in some cases. When it came to gay rights, there was a big backlash. I think sometime in the 2000s, because Disney was having events for gay people in their parks, and there was a big pushback from the evangelical churches, and Disney just stood its ground, And yet recently they stayed very quiet when Ron DeSantis decided to try and punish. I don't know if you've been following that story in Florida, but Ron.
Right. There was an attack on Disney.
Yes. And it'll be interesting to see where that all lands. But yeah, I think in the film we look at how, in so many ways, Disney reinforced our mid-20th century views on race with us, without you don't even. I mean, when you see those images, and when Heather McGhee is saying stolen lands and stolen people, and you see these Native Americans kind of jumping around all happy, or you see Aunt Jemima,
right. Sambo, Black Sambo.
And we all just, as at least me as a young person, you just soaked it in.
You accepted that, yeah.
Yeah, and that's very powerful.
The Chilean writer Ariel Dorfman did a book called How to Read Donald Duck. That was published in 1971, around the time that Salvador Allende was elected president. And he went into a whole further analysis of the role internationally that Disney played. And both in terms of race and also in terms of class, saying that, Donald Duck was just, a bit of a schlub and sort of incompetent, and Goofy was just, sort of clueless to the extreme. And then the Donald Duck artist came back and said, no, I made Donald Duck to be hapless and ineffectual and sort of down on his luck, because that's how I felt being underpaid by Disney.
That's wonderful.
And my grandfather had a cousin in Maine who was one of the creators of Bambi, and he bailed out. So it was a sweatshop.
What year was that?
That would have been, I don't even know, 40s probably. So there's been a sense among the artists at Disney as well.
Yes.
And even in terms of film production, in terms of live action drama, Disney has always been seen as sort of, the most tight-fisted and sort of, but that's probably what's building. This is, there's nothing contrary to, the sort of ethic of, successful business.
Exactly.
And so in that way, the film becomes a larger.
Exactly. I think that we hoped that the film would not just be seen as a film about Disney, but really a film about what's happening to the American economy and what's happened to workers. As Abby often says, if I was Abby Ford even, or some other company, people wouldn't turn their heads. But when you say Disney, people stop in their tracks.
Right.
And I've witnessed that a lot too, just traveling with her. It's when she shows her passport, or
it's royalty.
it's unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah,
and
sure.
She wants to be a schlub. She's not looking most of the time to, to have people talk about, to put down the red carpet for her. But but people Americans really care about this company.
Yeah,
It is an American company through and through.
Partly because there was, of course, there was Popeye, and then the sort of, what was that? The syndicate that created the sort of Popeye line, and which was not Disney.
Hanna-Barbera.
And then there's Hanna-Barbera, yeah. And of course they were probably a pretty big threat to Disney when they were starting to develop. Questions from the audience? Yes, back here. Jen.
I just wanted Kathy to share a little bit about the distribution challenges
Sure.
with a film like this.
Yeah.
The media consolidation,
Disney Channel.
the Disney Channel.
The long and the short of it is that we are self-distributing. We have been turned down by every platform.
Wow.
Nobody wants to touch it.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
not surprisingly, Abby, it was interesting. We were finishing up in the last December, and Sundance asked if they could play it at their festival. So we really had to scramble. And Abby, said, "Oh, we're going to be handing out DVDs." But suddenly there was some real interest, and we thought, "Oh, maybe we will be able to find, a distributor and a buyer." And that never happened.
And no television, I guess.
No PBS.
You can get on Amazon, of course, just yourself.
Yes, exactly. As
Yeah.
self-distribution, we can,
Right.
and we will. In fact, in September 23rd, we go up. We'll go up in video, VOD, and we are going to be in a bunch of theaters around the country.
When's that coming?
Starting in Orlando, we're going to the Belly of the Beast.
Wow.
September 18th, and then Anaheim, and then we're in New York, Chicago. So we're moving around.
Yeah.
We're gonna.
What's your next project? I'm sure you're already involved with something.
You'd be surprised. Still working. Still working on what it might be.
Yeah. And how about Abigail? What's she planning?
She's planning to spend the next year working on this, working on the impact campaign. There's a big impact campaign that's coming together.
It would be effective in schools, certainly too.
Yeah, and she's a great, public speaker and is in great demand. So I think her short-term goal is to really get out on the road with this.
I mean, one of the big issues that comes through is affordability. And I think that issue, especially in the area of housing and now food because of inflation, but has really become huge in terms of just what do you need to be earning? Because the federal minimum wage now is still $7.25 an hour.
No one will push that thing up. It's crazy.
Is anybody actually working for that amount of money?
In some
Must be.
states,
Yeah, wow.
there are some, especially in the South states, that match the federal minimum. Many states have gone higher.
One issue that's developed in Vermont is that there are undocumented farm workers here that are actually essential to dairy farming.
Interesting.
But they are very vulnerable when it comes to pay, and some are being paid like $5 an hour.
Oh,
And they have, then they have to sort of stay beneath the radar and can't really get health coverage. It's really a very difficult situation there. So there seems to be a reckoning in store that is overdue.
absolutely.
That really, without it, one could argue it's a national security issue.
Can't agree with you more. I mean, it's remarkable, and it is really interesting to watch people piece it all together. It's very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Um,
How long did it take you to make the film?
We started in 2018, and we finished in late 2021.
Yeah. Maybe you should try to get an Academy Award nomination.
Oh, that's okay. That would shake things up. We'll see. But yeah, no, and we had COVID and all kinds of, interruptions that I guess every filmmaker that you've had to talk with in the last couple of years has had to deal with.
Yes.
So,
Right.
yeah.
Son of Flubber. Remember that?
Yes, I do.
I like Flubber.
Oh, I did too. But not to go on, but I feel like people like me were very much beneficiaries of that mid-century system that we had in place.
Yeah.
Two parents didn't go to college. White people were able to afford a house for
Right.
kids, send their kids to college. I could have a summer job, pay for my tuition. That
Well-
whole system has really collapsed. And
Tuition,
then-
when I went to college, tuition was basically,
I don't know why Flubber reminded me of that.
well, that's where we all came from.
Right.
We're still flubbing around with Flubber. College tuition was like 20% of a middle-class salary in 1968, roughly. And it is more than a middle-class salary now.
Right.
If you go to private college.
Absolutely.
So that in itself is just, you talk about affordability, it's impossible. It's really, public college has become increasingly important, but actually the funding's not there to really make them be all that they could, and a lot of public colleges are actually floundering as well.
Exactly.
So it's a
And
difficult time.
It's difficult, but I think as Heather McGee says, and many others have told us, this is all about changing the system, that it can, it's not just an act of God or the weather. These are all conscious
Right.
economic
That's
choices.
interesting.
And I think that's really important. I hope that's a takeaway from the film, that
Yeah.
people realize it doesn't have to be this way.
I once made a documentary about the literacy crusade in Nicaragua and had a meeting with Paulo Freire, the Brazilian sort of educator who was all about combining faith and consciousness-changing education. And he said, the thing is, in Latin America, because he sort of was a model for the Nicaraguan literacy crusade, and which was based on getting peasants to be able, who grow crops, to be able to read the packet of seeds, basically, and know what happens to the product. And he said, in Latin America, the issue is the overwhelming power of God. That's what you have to demystify. People are really deeply affected by that. And so we need to say, the hurricane is an act of God. The National Guard coming into your village and grabbing your son and putting him into the military is not. It's a willful act of man. And let's start there.
Exactly.
He said, but in the United States, he said, if only it was so simple as to demystify the power of God. He says, because in the United States, it's the power of the media, the establishment, and technology. And that's sort of, anyway, I'm diverging. Sorry.
We're out of time.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.
It's a wonderful film.